Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Zach Beach, and I'm here with the incredible couples therapist and meditation teacher, George Taylor. Hello, George, and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me here, Zach. Zach and I met when he was doing his live shows, and I really felt his commitment to helping people learn how to love. And so it's an honor to be back with you.
And it's an honor to have you back. And today we're going to talk about keeping the love alive in a pandemic and beyond. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit more about George. For those that don't know, George Taylor is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 25 years of experience. He also teaches meditation at the Spirit Rock Meditation Center and believes in the power of mindfulness and communication to create more love and joy in our relationships. He is the author of A Path for Couples, which focuses on using awareness to build intimacy and break bad habits of reactivity. How are you doing today, George?
Well, I'm good. I was just saying to Zach, I did an online course and just felt the power of awareness while I was teaching that, and still feel it right now, that just the power of awareness, how it can radically change our lives and help us become more loving and more creative and more connected with our partners, our friends, our family, etc. So it's a beautiful day in Northern California, and I feel happy to be here to share this with you.
I'm happy to hear what you have to say as well and to learn about the power of awareness. And one thing I wanted to just be a little bit more of aware of right now is sort of the challenges that people are going through in this pandemic. We've been sheltering in place in different levels of quarantine for many months now. And all of these actions are designed to protect people's physical health and the spread of this virus. But I've been really concerned about people's mental health and the challenges and uncertainty of an unknown future, but also knowing how important social connection is to our mental health. It's really challenging to find that connection right in the here and now. So I'm wondering, what kind of challenges are you seeing with your clients?
Well, people are feeling a lot of anxiety for sure about all the changes. I mean, there's financial, spiritual, economic, cultural, racial, gender changes that are sweeping through our country, through our population. And those changes can be anxiety provoking. That can make us feel uneasy. Some therapists would call these identity crises, like the things that we're used to doing, the schools we're used to going to, the friends we're used to seeing, the job that we have is now changed usually. So there's a massive internal and external change. And there's an opportunity to bring consciousness into all these changes, into all these things that we're used to doing, and finding ways to be more loving, more awake, more conscious, more creative, more vital. But the downside is all this change creates uncertainty. And humans, generally speaking, don't like uncertainty. It's traditional or interesting when I hear from couples in calling me on the phone. I've been getting calls, from couples for 30 plus years. Usually the couple or the individual is having some change in their life. In my business, they're called life cycle changes, where, they have a new job or a new partner, or their partner got sick, or they've moved. In other words, there's some outside disturbance that makes them aware that they need to look at themselves and look at the way they do things. So you could say that the whole country is going through a life cycle change, and it's an identity crisis. It's a chance to grow and transform old patterns, but it's also a chance to succumb to anxiety and depression because of the isolation, which is actually very dangerous. It's dangerous for humans to be isolated. And I just talked to a family member who was expressing loneliness. He has recently retired from his job. He's at home with his wife mostly. His daughter's away. So just my heart went out to him because I feel it myself. There's a loneliness of not being in contact with the people we're usually in contact with. And suddenly we realize those relationships are like food. They're like food for our soul and actually for our bodies.
So I'm also feeling that as well. There's the anxiety, of course, of the uncertain future. We don't know how long this is going to last, how deep it's going to go. And there's also the depression that results from being socially isolated from others. And I'm wondering what you meant when you said we want to bring consciousness into things. So once we realize the anxiety around an uncertain future and the depression of being socially isolated, how can we use the power of awareness, the power of consciousness to break out of these challenges?
Well, that's a very beautiful question. Another thing that is really common when a client or a couple would call me is that that life change I talked about, that identity transformation, it makes us feel very vulnerable. And I mean, many of us have felt that just when we see our neighbors and we talk to them, it's like, I mean, my heart just is so open. It's like, oh my gosh, like I'm talking to a human. And so we get used to that in our day to day lives. And then when we're deprived of that, we feel that anxiety, the isolation. And what I'm saying about the couples that call me is that transformation or that life cycle change that's going on within them shows itself in the relationship. And that's where we can talk about awareness. First of all, you can become aware of your own awareness or depression and take steps to heal that. Reaching out through Zoom, through phoning, walking at social distancing appropriately with masks out in the country or at a park, all that helps relieve anxiety physically. But what happens with the clients and couples that call me is that they become more reactive, right? We all have habits of reaction, defenses that arise, reactivities that arise. And in these vulnerable, anxious times, people tend to be more reactive. In other words, if you're a withdrawing type, you will tend to withdraw more. If you're an attacking or blaming type or a pursuing type, you will tend to attack, blame, and pursue more. I can speak on these topics of defenses because I'm an expert at all of them. I refer affectionately to the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. We have pursuing and withdrawing, we have attacking and defending. Mostly those defenses are connected to, as I said earlier, anxiety. Like we feel fear, we feel separate, and we lash out or we withdraw. So being aware of those patterns, it's kind of an amazing part of the human psychology, Zach. What happens very rarely in counseling is that people end counseling and go out and rob a bank or injure somebody, right? So somehow we finally get the sense that looking at ourselves, being aware of our reactions, aware of our internal world is good for us. That's why people meditate. That's why people do yoga. That's why people have couples counseling, because they sense that awareness helps them be better people. And we could talk more about that in a few minutes, what that really means. But so when you're caught in these systems of reactivity and these times of reactivity, if you become more aware, oh, I tend to withdraw, oh, I tend to lash out, then awareness, simply spoken, helps us to make better choices. It helps us to say, oh, I'm feeling that desire to withdraw. Oh, I'm feeling angry. I got to be careful I don't lash out. So consciousness, awareness, mindfulness, these common words these days are actually instrumental in helping us to make better choices. And then most of us that are aware of these reactivities and make better choices over time, you start to feel better about yourself. You say, oh, I can heal, I can grow, I can change. And the change is not just internal. Your external relationships change, your relationships with your children, with your friends, with your partners. They all begin to change because you're becoming more aware, and that almost automatically releases more love, more generosity, more patience, more ease. So the benefit of being aware, going back to your question, Zach, of your reactivities and your anxieties is you simply make better choices. You don't give in to the reactivity.
Yeah, I'm hearing that the anxiety is almost like accentuates any problems you may already be having in a relationship because when you do become anxious, you do more of those reactions that you're talking about, pursuing and withdrawing, attacking and defending. And I'm almost hearing that the first step towards solving a problem is being aware of the problem.
I would agree wholeheartedly. What I've said to a lot of couples is we all know couples who have the same conflicts for years, for decades, people in older generations. And so the combined reactivity, the thing that's important to notice about the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, attacking and defending go together. Attacking elicits defending. Pursuing elicits withdrawing. Withdrawing elicits pursuing. So the point is that these patterns go together, they fit together. And when we're trying to become more aware of them, then we can change them. We can become more open and more loving people. And that's the function, as we're saying, about awareness and consciousness. It helps us look into these patterns, which are exacerbated in these times, and it helps to change these reactive patterns.
So I'm almost imagining when we talk about building awareness in our relationships, we want to think about like almost three levels of awareness. We can have self awareness, so be aware of our own patterning. We can have awareness of dynamics in the relationship. And we can also create awareness about our partner and the challenges that they are going through. So let's go to the kind of the first layer first. Let's talk about self awareness. We talked about already being aware of our own anxiety or our own depression that might be deepened by the current pandemic that we are in. But what are some other things I want to be aware of in myself in order to be of benefit to my relationship?
Well, that's such a great question. I've been at a lot of residential meditation retreats myself. And what happens in a meditation practice or a practice of breathing, self-awareness, yoga, is that you begin to sense actually the physical constrictions of your body. You begin to sense when your breathing is open, when your breathing is closed. And so, as one of my therapists once said, let's keep it simple. There's only two things you need to think about in terms of your emotions and your physiology. That's that there's fear and there's love. So fear is a state of tension. It's a state of resistance. It's a state of holding back. Love, speaking a little simplistically here, is a state of openness, of fluidity, of motion, of interactivity, of exchange of energy and information. So I think on a level of self-awareness, one needs to be aware of, do I feel open right now? Do I feel closed? And then the next step in that investigation is, oh, if I'm feeling open and I'm with my friend, what would I like to say about that? What would I like to share about that? How do I feel being open with my friend or my partner? And then being closed, awareness is an amazing tool because it invites you to ask, what am I afraid of? What is it that I'm afraid of? And so maybe you're afraid of isolation. Maybe you're afraid of getting the disease, COVID-19. But then being aware, you can go, okay. Awareness helps us go, oh, I can open to that. That's one of the great spiritual teachings, awareness teachings that I was taught. I can't say I learned it thoroughly a long time ago. Opening to where you feel closed. Just go, oh, take a breath. Oh, now I'm open. Doesn't mean that the fear goes away. Doesn't mean that you might still get the disease or you might still feel lonely. But somehow you're telling your body it's okay. It's okay to be aware. It's okay to open to that. It's okay to open your heart. And so, truthfully, Zach, my focus in my work is on the relational field. That is the field between people. I've been married for a long time. My wife is a therapist and a spiritual teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Woodacre, California. And we can test our self-awareness. Am I open or closed with my partner, with my mother, with my child, with my neighbor? That's another testing ground. It's a powerful testing ground for the tools of awareness.
That's such a really wonderful shift you're describing. The first thing I'm hearing is moving from the mind to the body and getting caught up in our thoughts. There's that phrase that, anxiety is being caught up in the future and depression is lamenting on the past. And it's the mind that, of course, creates the constructs of past and future, but the body is always in the present. So first, we shift from being aware of our thoughts to being in touch with our body. And once we do, we notice those constrictions. And I just love what you said, that fear is a state of holding back and love is a state of openness. And the body can almost be that gauge that tells us how open we are and how closed we are.
That's a wonderful summary. What I've noticed working with lots of couples, clients, friends that are on the path for couples, myself and my wife, is that process of opening, I've said and asked in big workshops, that process of opening is common to people. many of us have had experiences where our history drops away, our psychology drops away, maybe with a child or with a really old friend or a parent. You're looking into their eyes and your history just drops away and you experience something like awe or openness beyond the body, openness beyond the galaxy almost, to where you're in this other state of awareness, of love, of appreciation. And those times are memorable. The thing is that when I ask people in large workshops, 100, 200, 300 people, almost everyone has had an experience like that. So the body is innately wired for these experiences of openness, of deep compassion, deep ease, deep letting go. The body is wired for those. And awareness and consciousness are the tools that allow us to open more deeply to those all the time. And so the depths of love that are inside of you right now, the depths of creativity, of vitality, are unfathomable. You know, poets and writers have been talking about this for millennia. This is not new news to the human race. The thing is the people that have those kind of openings have a methodology to get there, to have those experiences. And that's what's exciting about awareness, about meditation practice, about yoga practice, Tai Chi practice. It allows us to continue that opening process. I think I read somewhere, Zach, a little sidebar is that I've been in a study group, a neurodharma study group. We're studying the connections between the physiology of people, meditation, relationship, and actual brain research. And it's something amazing, like there are as many connections in your brain as there are stars in the universe. That's how many connections are in. So if we can illuminate and inspire and transform those connections, then our whole body wakes up to all these essential states that I'm talking about.
So the body is innately wired for openness and deep compassion, and awareness is the tool to get in touch with that joy. And in so doing, what I'm hearing from you is the entire mind gets rewired into more joy and compassion. And so let's say, I've done my meditation practice. I've gotten in touch with my own body. I've cultivated a bit of mindfulness in my own life. And now I'm ready to meet my partner, my wife, my relationship with that open heart. And you talked earlier about the field between people that you work with. So you mentioned your own four horsemen of the apocalypse, not to be confused with John Gottman's horsemen of the apocalypse, although they're very similar,
Yeah.
And you talked about the pursuing, withdrawing, attacking, and defending. So those are the things like we don't want, right? So what are the things we do want to create and cultivate and practice in our relationships?
Well, yeah, it's so interesting thinking about like what I've said to a lot of clients and couples, Zach, is that those four patterns are really signposts to our own healing. One of the things that the couples tend to do is when they call in, the person's implicit thought is, if I can just get my partner to heal, everything will be fine. And the point is that couples have these repetitive conflicts. Most couples or with your friends, you will have this, and with your parents or kids, you will have the exact same kind of conflicts repeatedly. And so an unconscious person, a person that's not studying themselves, will say, I just can't get that person to change. I can't get the other to change. And they don't realize that there's a system of unconscious beliefs, unconscious practices, unconscious habits, unconscious childhood experiences on both people's side. Okay. So without that awareness of your own conditioning, your own training, the kind of reactions you tend to make, then you will tend to repeat for decades, as I said earlier. So the point is the client or the couple needs to learn that say it's withdrawing behavior. I mean, I cannot tell you how many stories when you go through a very simple inquiry process, which is in my book, Path for Couples, which is really like, what does your body feel like right now when you want to withdraw? Where's your breathing? What language are you using? What's your tone of voice? What's your heart feel like? When you take somebody through that very personal and very intimate inquiry, then you realize that the withdrawing person is not numb, is not a stone. They're too afraid to talk, is the basic answer. So why are they afraid? They're afraid because normally they got shamed or injured when they shared when they were kids. I mean, I'm summarizing thousands of vignettes, thousands of stories, overgeneralizing. But the point is, the withdrawing person, if you think about that just for a moment, think about the kids you know, the kids that are 4, 5, 6, they are like fountains of feeling, fountains of imagination. They are spewing their inner world constantly. So that gets shut down by acculturation, by the parents or the caregivers or school or grandparents, sort of subtly or not so subtly encouraging certain kinds of expressions and not encouraging, shutting down certain other kinds of expressions. Now, I've studied a lot of men's psychology and run the men's group. There isn't a man listening to this audience that hasn't been told, don't cry, don't act like a girl, don't be a wussy. That is shaming and acculturation behavior right there. So that's why it's hard oftentimes for a person that's gone through that, it can be a man or a woman, to share openly because they're afraid to. They have been injured when they were younger. So I like to imagine that if you take the path of awareness, again, with friends or with parents or your kids or your neighbors, and you start studying what is it you tend to do with them? When are you open? When are you closed? Then you can start to understand, oh, I was trained to be this way, right? So a withdrawing person was trained. It's not like it's some essential innate part of their body. No, their essential nature, their deep nature is to be alive, vital, contactful, crazy, loving, angry, sad, jealous, everything a kid is. That's who we are. That's not rocket science. So if you can teach the couple that the withdrawing, et cetera, or the pursuing is a symptom, and it's a symptom that's pointing towards a deep healing in themselves, then you've completely rerouted their psychology. You've completely rerouted their inquiry. You've completely rerouted their idea of who has to change. And once a person starts changing themselves, the relationship automatically changes because you're not caught up in the same behaviors that hook into your partners. That's what's an amazing realization about what you can call field theory. You know, that going back to your statement about the field is that interaction, a subtle interaction between two people or three people or a family. Even a baseball stadium has a field. But the point is that when you change your field, become more aware of your field, inject more openness or more consciousness or more forgiveness into the field, the other person indirectly or directly feels that. So that's a kind of an extended answer to the question of, you know, watching your repetitions, trying to open to the field, noticing when you're closed, and using awareness to summon up these deeper essential states of love, joy, and compassion.
So I totally agree with you in sort of all the ways we become indoctrinated by our culture, but also all the ways past conditioning doesn't serve us in our relationships, perhaps conditioning from society or conditioning from our parents. And I think it's interesting that your segue into that idea was that we always want to change things about our partners. And we think, oh, if only my partner did this or understood me or healed, then our relationship could really work and blossom. Now, would you say that is almost like another signpost to the healing that we need to do? Like when we notice certain things we want to change about our partner, is that actually a signpost to certain things in ourselves that need healing?
I used to have this more idealistic version of growth and transformation. Say, well, I just need to work on myself and let my partner be and just let her be, in this case, Deborah, my wife. But no, we all want our partners to change. Let's be honest with that. Of course, we want our partners to change. We don't like the feeling of our own reactivity. Like our reactivity causes us pain, it causes us anxiety, it causes us loneliness. So, of course, we want our partner to change. The problem is the way that we try to get our partners to change just doesn't work very well. You know, I refer to it as emotionally inefficient. Think of all the things you've asked your partner to change over the years, or your friend or your mother. It doesn't work very well, right? There's a kind of an inefficiency because it's a complaint. Whatever you say comes across as a complaint or a judgment. And then they're like, yeah, you want to judge me? Well, I'm going to judge you. or I'm going to defend against that judgment. So you've got a subtle attacking and blaming. So your question is great because the desire to change your partner is a signpost that something's not right. And yes, it would be great to talk to your partner and say, hey, would you put the toothpaste cap back on straight? Or would you park in the garage in a way that I can get my car in? Of course, we make requests of the other person all the time. But I go back to the central principle. The best way to change the relationship is to change yourself. So, yes, thinking about how you want your partner to change is one step. But then, if you go back to the model I was suggesting, the reason you want your partner to change is not really about them, it's about yourself. It's about something they do makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel angry, or makes you feel lonely, or makes you feel anxious. It's because you have that inner, in our business, it's called ego dystonic. You have these uncomfortable feelings. That's the only reason you want your partner to change. If you feel good, you don't need them to change. So it's trying to understand again, like, what does this feeling remind me of? Oh, I was anxious when my parents divorced, or I was anxious when my sister drank too much. So there's some internal experience that is generating that uncomfortable feeling. And that uncomfortable feeling is something you were trained to feel, basically. So you can heal that. You can change that in the way I was saying. But yeah, we want our partners to change. I just don't think we go about it in a way that works.
I love that phrase. The way we try to get our partners to change is emotionally inefficient. And a huge part of that is because it does sound or often sound like criticism or like complaining. And when we hear our partner or when we hear ourselves being criticized, of course, we might withdraw, become defensive.
Well, in couples counseling, when I'm going through this inquiry process with people, I'm always trying to go through this little drill. Okay, what does that remind you of? What does your body feel like? Do you have any associations from childhood? People can't always remember some epiphany from childhood, some terrible thing that happened, but they can begin to understand their own physiology and their own reactivity and talk about it in a different way. I've said to many couples, we never had a course in this in grade school or high school. I had a lot of world history, right? But I didn't have much in what does my body feel like and how do I talk about that? And the thing is, when people learn how to do that, and their partner's often listening, or I'm listening if it's individual work, I must have heard 500 times, I never told anybody that. There's these deep stories that we hold in ourselves, which are controlling us, which are creating these reactions. And somehow, in this wonderful magic of relationship, when you reveal that story, you heal parts of it. You are less attached to it. In 12-step, some of you are, I'm sure, familiar. We're only as sick as our secrets, right? And what you reveal, you heal. So there's some innate wisdom that we understand that when we can go from the symptom to the body, to the memory, to the training, then we something deep about ourselves. In the book, I call that self-disclosure. Sometimes you get chills listening to people tell these amazingly deep stories, and then they go, they're trembling, they're crying. There's so much vitality in the release of energy. And that's what's emotionally efficient. I can't tell you how many partners say, I never knew my behavior affected you so deeply. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's such a powerful statement because the partner has to take in, oh my God, my stupidity, my forgetfulness, my not putting the toothpaste cap on, my tone of voice, my eyebrow. It has an emotional impact I knew nothing about. And because people love each other, they're like, I don't want to do that to you, right? So revealing yourself leads to understanding. Understanding leads to empathy. Empathy leads to change of behavior. That is emotional efficiency. That's how you get your partner to change, not by judging them.
So beautiful. The deep stories we hold in ourselves control us. And when we reveal that story, we heal. It's so true. And I'm wondering, how do we encourage that vulnerability? I'm sure even in your couples sessions, you might have people that have been together 10, 15, 20 years. And then suddenly, through your encouragement of a safe space in the couple session, an intensely vulnerable emotion comes out, or even like one person might even drop a bombshell on the relationship that could have been shared, many years prior, but there maybe wasn't that safe space for it. So if what we reveal, we heal, how do we find the courage? How do we create the space for vulnerability to happen in our relationship so that I feel safe to share something and also my partner feels safe to hear it?
I wasn't a couples counselor for too long before I realized that most of what we're trying to do in couples counseling is build up the feeling of security, to build up the feeling of trust. And so just want to make a couple of quick statements about trust. One is trust is not a steady state. Okay. It changes in all relationships. Your friend forgets to pick you up when you're going out, for coffee, or a painful thing I did to my sister accidentally. It had to do with estate planning of all things. I misunderstood her. I wasn't conscious of her. She was able to bring that up to me because of the length of our relationship. She trusted me. I was able to say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened." So she told me about her pain and I was able to receive it. That's not always the case. Sometimes we hold our hurts in and you start to notice how those damage the relationship, right? That you want that open flow. So, how do you create that trust? How do you create that security? Briefly, in couples counseling, what I tell people is that there are two ways to create security and trust in couples counseling or in your relationship. And it's really important to remember that trust is not a steady state. You can damage the trust accidentally. Your friend, your parent can accidentally damage the trust. Without some kind of healing process, that damage lasts. That damage lasts. So, briefly, what I've said, it's in my book as well. You need to have intentions about how you're going to conduct the relationship. One of the intentions that I hold in my deep relationships, not in casual relationships, not in work relationships, but one of the intentions is I want to be responsible. If somebody says I've injured them, I want to be responsible to that. I want to say, oh, okay, here's what I was thinking. Here's what I did. Here's what I could have done better. Okay. So, one of the things that's key is having an intention of creating trusting, clear, open relationships. And that requires a kind of vulnerability, authenticity, and honesty. So, I've noticed that the people that I have that open door with, I tend to get closer to. If I'm with somebody, I feel protective. I don't trust them. There's injuries in the past I haven't been able to clear, or behaviors keep happening. Then I start to pull away. I think it's a natural human process. So there's the level of intention, and there's very important intentions I'll just go over quickly. One is, I want to create a safe, loving relationship with you. I've said that explicitly to some of my friends, family members, certainly to my partner. I want to have a safe, loving relationship. So we're on the same page. That is a shared intention. Another intention I just mentioned is to be as vulnerable as possible, as vulnerable as you feel safe. So then the second part of that trust building practice is you have to be able to notice and change your behaviors. If you say, I want to trust you, and you keep blaming them and you keep withdrawing from them, or you keep attacking them, or you keep pursuing and withdrawing with them, well, trust is going to dissolve. It doesn't increase the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. It descends, it lowers. So the point is that creating safety in a relationship requires conscious intention, spoken or unspoken, and it requires you to be more available, to be open about yourself. Normally the things that we do that hurt each other are unconscious behaviors, often driven by conditioning, like we've been talking, driven by our training, our fears, or often by the cultural situation, the pandemic and the anxiety. I get really nasty when I'm hungry, when I'm tired. So there are conditions that drive us into making unconscious reactivities. And if we're aware of those and try to share those with our friend, and we go, I didn't mean to be like that, I could have been better, then there's a vulnerability even in that sharing. There's a vulnerability in that opening. So your question is an important one, Zach, because I think it extends to all relationships, with your parents, with your neighbors, your partner. So you have to have the intention of creating safety and love, and you have to follow through and open to that, be open to that. Maybe because I'm getting older, but I'm just saying I love you to a lot more people. And I notice how it makes me feel really open to them. And it's true, it's true. So another methodology I'm just realizing as we're talking is to be more positive with people, more open, more complimentary, more loving, more blessing, and to say those simple things. I love you. I care about you. I want the best for you. I want you to be healthy. So that opens up that channel where the two of you can kind of rest in positive feelings.
That is such a powerful affirmation, just saying, I want to have a safe and loving relationship with you. I appreciate you also emphasizing that we have more than one intimate relationship, in our lives. We have intimate relationships with our friends, with our family, and of course with our partner as well. But all of those relationships we can bring love into. So you mentioned two ways to create security and trust. And the two ways almost remind me of what are sometimes described as the two wings of spiritual awakening, our
Wow.
attention and our intention. So we have an intention for authenticity, for honesty, for safety, for vulnerability. And then we have our attention on our own behaviors and being able to notice the change and growth that we have to go through. And I know in your book and in your teachings, you talk about relationships in of themselves of being a spiritual practice. And I wanted to kind of hear more about your perspective, particularly because you come from a bit of a mindfulness Buddhist background. And I know many religions and spiritualities are rooted in kind of like an asceticism or a monasticism where you might take vows to be celibate. And often being in an intimate relationship with another person is not seen as part of the spiritual practice. But many of us and many listeners and people, particularly in the West, are interested in having an authentic spirituality and to maintain loving and intimate relationships with others. So I was hoping you could just tell us about what it means to have a relationship as a spiritual practice.
It's so interesting that you would ask that, because as I was getting ready for our conversation today, Zach, I was looking at some of the emails we exchanged, and I looked at that term relationship as a spiritual practice. I was like, yeah, what does that really mean? So I think it sounds a little esoteric to me. It's like, I don't want a spiritual practice. I just want to connect with somebody. So I'm going to break it down and let's say less spiritual terminology here. I live in Marin, and as you can imagine, I've seen all kinds of spiritual practices in my office. Okay. Buddhists with Hindus. I've seen agnostic with Wiccan. I've seen Catholics with Jews. So there's this background of diversity in these traditions. And oftentimes they say, oh, we don't have the same tradition, so we have lots of trouble. And I go, okay, that can be true on the level of practice, on the level of going to what church on Sunday or Saturday or Friday, whatever day you go. But I think that generally speaking, a spiritual practice, and it could be psychotherapy, it could be shamanism, it could be meditation. I'm trying to summarize like 10,000 books I've read here.
And it's tough, right?
But the point is that most of these practices are rooted in a belief system that there is acculturation, there is training, there is habit forming, and that there's a deeper part of our soul, a deeper part of our vitality, a deeper part of our heart, which can be engaged if we pay attention, if we meditate, if we do shamanic practices and fast, or go out into the woods and meditate for a long time. So there's a general agreement among spiritual practices that there's some methodology that will take us deeper into ourselves. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, that inside the body is where the universe is. And most spiritual practices, capital letters, take us there through some channel, whether it could be chanting, it can be fasting, like I said, it can be devotional practice, it can be meditation, it can be yoga, it can be extreme sports. Pick your poison. But the point is that most of us listening to your show, most of us that have done some kind of yoga or inquiry or therapy, sense that deeper part of ourselves, and we want to develop it. So when I think of spiritual practice, I think it's simpler to describe who is the person you think is inside you that you want to become. And I think that is a sacred quest. I could use that terminology. That's a sacred inquiry. Who is that person that you want to become? Because for one thing, that's a lifelong question. We're not going to get to the end of the show and go, hey, Zach, I got it. I'm cool. I'm now the greatest essential person I've ever wanted to be. I'm good to go. I don't have to talk to anybody ever again. Well, no, There's a process that we're all going through. It's called life, Life, life. And you can either choose to operate in that life in a state of unconsciousness, reactivity, habituation, and basic stupidity, or you can say, hey, let's wake up here. Let's wake up as a family. Let's wake up as a community. Let's wake up as a podcast. And that waking up, as I said earlier, is not rocket science. We sense inside of ourselves. We can feel more at ease. We can feel less judgmental. We catch ourselves, commenting ad nauseum about the political situation, and we go, isn't there anything else I could think about? That's called awareness. That thought is called awareness. And so awareness is going to take us deeper and deeper into the body, deeper and deeper into these essential states. And, there's a lot of different terminology that I'm using, essential states. So to keep it simple, generosity, compassion, awareness, forgiveness, ease, love, kindness. Isn't this what we all want? And so a theory here, which I'm operating under, is because mindfulness has no limit, there's no limit to how aware you could become of the world, of all the gladiola that's blooming right now outside my window, of my own desire to serve people through this podcast. There's no end to that. It's like a fantastic painter. They can keep developing an art approach to life, let's say. So awareness can take us deeper and deeper inside of ourselves. And I'm pretty sure, I've never read a real study on this, that there's no depth ending. There's no ending to the depth of compassion I can develop for the world, or for the people that have lost their jobs, or the people that are struggling being homeless. There's no end to the compassion, the love, the comfort I could offer to these people. So all that is inside the body. And all that is the function of a spiritual practice. It's to awaken our own awareness and then to change our own behavior so we can actually be more like the vision that we have of ourselves.
I feel like you just summed up spirituality in just a really beautiful way, and that it's a methodology that can take us deeper into ourselves. Maybe deep in ourselves, we find the divine, we find a connection to an external divine. So many ways to get in touch with that dimension deeper within ourselves, and many paths. But of course, we find that generosity, compassion, ease, and kindness, and no limits to how much we can bring kindness and care and compassion into our lives. That's so beautiful. And, we are running a little bit low on time. I don't know how it happened. So I want to jump real quick to your book, and then also to my final question, because in your book, A Path for Couples, 10 Practices for Love and Joy, you have 10 incredible practices that any couple can bring into their relationship. We don't have time to go through all of them, so I'll just ask you, which practice do you find yourself using the most?
Let me give a tiny bit of background first. When couples come in to see me, or clients come in to see me, let's say particularly couples, as you asked about the practices for couples, they're in what you could call a negative spiral, right? They're feeling very sensitive to each other, vulnerable, resentful, isolated. I can't tell you how many people have said everything causes a problem, right? I ask about the dry cleaning, and all of a sudden we're arguing. Well, again, it's because of the anxiety and the vulnerability. But the conversations are revolving in this negative cycle where you feel more vulnerable, more anxious, more separate, more resentful. Then that gets fed back into the relationship. That's no fun, just to keep it simple. So I think couples need to create what I call a positive spiral, a positive spiral. And it doesn't mean not recognizing that there's problems in a relationship that need to be healed and addressed, but it means that there has to be a way to create positive energy. Okay, so there's 2 or 3 practices in the book that actually create that positive energy. So I'll just say them briefly because they're all equally valuable. One is, like I said earlier, to have intention. Intentions generally bring people together. When you say, I want to have a safe, loving relationship with you, it's very uncommon that the partner goes, that's a bad idea. So intentions inherently bring people together and start to rebuild or recreate the relationship in a positive realm. Another a positive practice, again, which tends to drop out when people are feeling angry and resentful, is appreciation. Love is expressed through gratitude and appreciation. So if you make a conscious effort to appreciate your partner, to feel grateful for your partner and make that verbal, you start creating that positive spiral. You start creating that spiral of positive feeling, which usually needs to be replenished by the time people come in to see me. And the third practice, I describe a real simple breath meditation, a 5-10 minute breath meditation. People can do yoga together, go on quiet walks together, do Tai Chi together. But to rebuild the relationship, our physiology needs to be rebuilt. And one way to do that is to relax and meditate together. It lowers the anxiety level and helps you remember, oh, yeah, I'm in this relationship. I want this relationship to work. We're starting to build that positive spiral. And I do want to say, again, that positive spiral, it has no upper limit, right? You can create more positive energy, which is the love, the compassion, the ease. And you can keep building it through these very basic practices. My wife and I are still doing all these practices after almost 40 years. And I think I attest to the fact that we're still feeling the openness and the compassion and the vitality that can arise by continuing that upward spiral. It's like looking up, at the Milky Way and going, where does it stop? It doesn't stop anywhere. That's the potential of these positive practices.
Such a beautiful image, just creating a positive spiral in our relationships. So I heard you say, have intention. Everything comes down to intention, doesn't it? Have intention, express love through gratitude and appreciation, and then to breathe together, to meditate together, to relax together. And that final step, or that third practice you mentioned, I feel goes way back to a question that came up earlier around anxiety and the more anxiety that people are feeling in relationships. And it's such a good prescription is that, well, if you're feeling anxious, relax, breathe, go for a walk. And these are things we can, of course, do with our partner in order to increase the connection. So those are such beautiful, easy and simple methods to bring into our lives.
Well, Zach, one note on that. I have friends, that are sheltering in place by themselves. It's extremely difficult. It's extremely painful. But given what you just said, I want people to know that there's plenty of online meditation courses. You can go to spiritrockmeditationcenter.org, something like that, or your local Zen center, because there's lots of dance classes that are online now, yoga classes, meditation classes. And if you stick with it a while, you start feeling a sense of community. The community is one of the great healings. Connection is one of the great healings for anxiety. So those are some suggestions. A lot of you have already thought of those things, but just want to note that for those of you that are feeling isolated in the sheltering in place, and my heart goes out to you. It's not easy.
I very much appreciate that you're pointing that out. There are still ways, of course, to connect with each other, and a lot of it's online. No, but it is still a good way to connect. So I'll close out with a question I love to ask all of my guests, which is quite simply, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
Wow. Well, I've been lucky in my own relationship to be married to somebody that was on a spiritual quest from the time I met her, a quest to transform and to heal herself and by extension, heal me. And so I feel like I represent somebody that has had the experience of having had a difficult childhood with my own injuries, my own wounds. And what Deborah and I have said to a lot of people in workshops, if we can heal, anybody can heal. So I attest to the fact that the love you feel that's inside you is there. The healing that you feel is inside you is possible. And you will find a teacher. You will find a method. You will find a practice that works for you. I can't remember, it might be St. Francis or Kabir. It's the intensity of the longing that does all the work. So if you give in to your desire for healing, for love, for creativity, and give into it in a healthy way, in a positive way, then your life will transform. Consciousness is working for you, and you can always find a way to heal and a way to grow and a way to become that essential vision that you hold for yourself.
What a beautiful and hopeful message. Anyone can heal. We all have love inside of us, and it's very possible for us all to get in touch with it. Thank you so much, George. For those of our listeners looking to learn more about your amazing work that you do in the world, what's your website? How do people get in touch with you? And do you have any offerings you want to talk about?
Well, thank you, Zach. www pathforcouples.com. That's the name of my website. The book is the same name. And I do occasional free online courses. Of course, I do couples counseling. And you can go to the website. There's articles there you can read about relationship. And you can email me off the website if you want to follow up for sessions. And I look forward to speaking to those of you that are moved to contact me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, George, for coming onto the show and for sharing your wisdom. I know I learned a lot just in this short session with you, and I hope our listeners learned a lot as well. So thank you, listeners, for listening to the show. We hope you remember to create a positive spiral in your relationships of love and appreciation and gratitude through setting the intention to cultivate authenticity in a safe and loving space in all of your relationships. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to zachbeach.com and learn more about the show at theheartcenter.com. Thanks again, George.
Zach, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the way you can summarize and ask questions. It really helps kind of guide me, and I'm sure it helps guide the audience.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.